I just found myself reading it going, oh no. So please put your clothes back on and leave immediately. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. For those of you that have never met me before, I'm Gemma. So the content is mainly going to be around what I've read / reading, book recommendations, book hauls, my favourite authors, books that I had to DNF, and hopefully there won't be too many of those, because I do try, if I start a book I really do try and finish it, but I have had one of those already this year, which I will be talking about. If that sounds like something that you might be interested, please consider hitting the subscribe button, stick around, drop me a comment, let me know where you're listening in from. Always open to book recommendations, and let's start with what I read during May. So the first book that I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, and I don't know if you can see that. Oh, it's not picking up on it, look, it's because the gold metallic on it, it's not picking up on it. I really loved the premise of this book. So this book is based around Addie, and we first meet her as a young woman in France in the beginning of the 18th century. Now, as was the custom back then, Addie was expected to marry and have children, and she was the complete opposite of that. She didn't want to get married, she had no interest in that, she liked to draw, she wanted freedom, basically. And she keeps pushing it back and pushing it back. And eventually she agrees to marry a man who is a widower, already has children, you know, you're thrown straight in at the deep end. And so she runs into the woods and she is trying desperately to make a plea deal, make a bargain with the old gods to try and stop her from having to get married. Now, unfortunately for her, she comes across a god who's not particularly nice, more devil. Now, he tells her that he will grant her her freedom. She won't have to get married. She will also be immortal. However, the fine print for this deal was that nobody will ever remember Addie again. So when she meets someone, the second that she goes out of their sight, they will forget that they ever met her in the first place. And of course this means that her family forget who she is. She can never have romantic relationships. She can fall in love, but no one will ever fall in love with her. She can never build friendships, and that leads to quite a lonely life. It also means that she can never own property, she can never get a job, and also she can never say her name. So she can never tell anybody her real name is Addie LaRue. So she has to, every person she meets, she comes up with a fake name, and of course nobody ever remembers her, so it doesn't really matter what name she picks. Now, this goes on for 300 years, until one day that she comes across a bookshop in New York, where she meets a young man who remembers her. She goes back a second time and he remembers her from the previous time. And that's where, you know, for the first time in 300 years, she finds someone that she can finally bond with. But of course, no story is going to be that good if that's the end of it. So there are troubles that come along with it. This book bounces backwards and forwards between present day New York and then previous moments in Addie's life, which personally, that is not my favourite type of style to read, only because I get confused and I'm constantly like, hey, where am I? What time frame are we in? Now, I'd heard really great things about this book on TikTok. People were crying, like sobbing crying, so I was expecting a lot from it. And whilst I did like the story, it didn't leave me an emotional wreck. It's quite long. I felt that actually there was a lot of stuff that probably could have been cut out that still would have got the story across, and for those reasons I gave this book a solid 3.5 stars out of 5. The next book that I read that I loved, I cannot tell you how much I love this book, is River Sing Me Home by Eleanor Shearer. This is a debut novel, and when I say I loved this book, all the way through when I was reading this, all I kept thinking was, this book needs to be made into a film and more people need to hear this story. So in this book we follow the story of Rachel, Barbados. She is a slave. She has had many children whilst being a slave, some of which have died, some of which grew up, and once they reached a certain age, the plantation owners obviously viewing slaves as their property, sold the children on in order to make profit. And we follow Rachel's journey to track down her children. And I just thought that this was just such a powerful story of a mother's love, of strength, of resilience. There were parts in the story where I was holding my breath, like, oh no, please get away, get away, get away. There were moments where I had tears. Just a really great story. This is probably my favourite book that I've read so far this year. I highly recommend, if you haven't read it, to go and grab yourself a copy, and I give this book a 4 stars out of 5. Now the next one that I read isn't a fiction novel. It's the adult children of emotionally immature parents, because I am a massive psychology buff. This is a great book if you grew up in a household that was maybe a little chaotic, or a lot chaotic. If you grew up with maybe parents that kind of lack boundaries, or there's a sense of enmeshment within a family, this is just a really great book. I think it really can make you feel seen in your and validated in your opinions that maybe you didn't get from parents. On the back it says, if you grew up with an emotionally immature, unavailable or selfish parent, you may have lingering feelings of anger, loneliness, betrayal or abandonment. You may recall your childhood as a time when your emotional needs were not met, when your feelings were dismissed, or when you took on adult levels of responsibility in an effort to compensate for your parents' behaviour. These wounds can be healed and you can move forward in your life. So if that sounds at all like your childhood, I would definitely consider giving this book a read. It's not an overly massive book, but it does offer a lot of value. And like I say, if you want to be validated in your feelings, this one is the way to go. Now, when I spoke about DNFing books earlier, I really don't like to not finish a book, but I just couldn't with this next book. So I've been seeing a lot on TikTok, a lot of those kind of smutty books, and I thought, you know what, I'm still a young-ish woman in her 30s. I'm going to read some of these smut books and I'm going to see what all the hype is about. Now, this may have been my fault for jumping in too deep too soon, but the book that I read, and I don't have a physical copy, I read it on Kindle Unlimited, well, I started to read it on Kindle Unlimited, is Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. And look, this is not a judgment on anybody that has read that book. If you enjoyed it, good for you. I just found myself reading it going, oh no. One of the things that is guaranteed to put me off a book is when the dialogue between the characters is just cringy. And of course, this being an adult themed book, it was quite an extreme adult themed book, but just, oh no, the dialogue. In one scene, we have the main character, Adeline. She's picked up a guy in a bar. They've gone back to her house. They're, you know, doing adult things. And he turns around and whispers to her something like, "Let me hear you sing, little bird," or, no. "Sir, please put your clothes back on and leave immediately." So the story is Adeline is in this house and she is being stalked by this guy. So he keeps breaking into her house, he keeps leaving letters, and there's kind of this cat and mouse thing between the two of them. But she's actively engaging in his stalking behaviour and is communicating with him while he's doing it. There was a side theme in this book where her grandma, who also lived in the same house, was stalked by someone, and she finds letters and she's trying to figure out what happened to her grandma, because the grandmother ended up being murdered in the house. And I was really intrigued by that storyline. But then came the scene where Adeline and the stalker meet for the first time and they have their first adult fun together. Now when I say fun, it just wasn't my kind of thing. Let's just say that it involved the stalker putting a gun in a place where you wouldn't necessarily expect to put a gun on a woman. It wasn't for me. I think I'm just gonna have to make peace with the fact that I'm a very vanilla grandmother at this point, and I couldn't get past that part of it because it felt very rapey. I have to be careful what I say, I don't want to trigger YouTube on this one. Yeah, and I just couldn't, for me, I couldn't ever see the stalker in a "oh, I want you" type of way when he behaved in that way in the first instance. And like I said, there's absolutely no judgment from me to anybody who's read this book and enjoyed it. You know, we all have our own opinions. That's a great thing about books, right, is that we're all allowed to think what we want. So those were the books that I read for May. If you enjoy that and this is the type of content that you're interested in, give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, drop me a comment, let me know who you are, what you're currently reading, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.